The alien fleet hovered above Earth, their massive warships blocking out the stars. High Warlord Siron stood on the bridge of his flagship, arms crossed, his glowing yellow eyes staring at the dying planet below. His people had won. The war was over. Humanity was finished. For weeks, they had bombarded Earth's surface, reducing cities to rubble. The skies burned with fire, and the oceans boiled. No human ships had been seen in days. No defenses remained. It was only a matter of time before the last survivors crawled out of their hiding places, begging for mercy. Tyron smiled. There would be no mercy. A sudden beep on the control panel caught his attention. One of his officers, a thin, reptilian creature with dark blue scales, turned in confusion. "A transmission, Warlord," the officer said. "It's coming from Earth." Siron frowned. That was impossible. All human communication systems had been destroyed. He walked closer, looking at the screen. A single message blinked, waiting to be played. He gestured to his officer. "Open it." The bridge fell silent as the transmission began. A dark screen appeared, filled with static. Then, slowly, a voice spoke. Deep, calm, cold. "You have sealed your fate." Tyron narrowed his eyes. It was a human voice, but there was something strange about it. It lacked fear. It was not the voice of someone pleading for life. The static cleared, revealing an image. The lone figure sat in a dark room, their face hidden in shadow. Only their eyes were visible, two piercing, unblinking lights. The voice continued. "We knew you would come. We knew you would try to take what is not yours. And we prepared for this day." The officers on the bridge exchanged nervous glances. Tyron scoffed. This was a desperate attempt to scare them. "Find the source of this transmission," he ordered. The technicians worked quickly, scanning for signals. But something was wrong. The coordinates led to a place where no human bases remained. It was broadcasting from everywhere, from abandoned satellites, from deep beneath the ground, even from the wreckage of human cities. One of the officers turned, his voice shaky. "Warlord, the signal. It's connected to the entire planet." Siron's grip on the railing tightened. He stared at the screen, watching as the figure leaned forward. "You think we are gone. You think this world is yours. But you have made a mistake." The lights on the warship flickered. A low hum filled the air, a strange energy pulse that made the metal floors vibrate. "Shut it down," Siron barked. The technicians tried, but nothing worked. The transmission continued, and now, something else was happening. The planet below, which had been quiet for days, was waking up. Faint tremors shook the surface. Buildings that had been still for weeks suddenly powered back on. Deep underground, something rumbled. Something massive. One of the officers shouted, "We're detecting movement beneath the surface." Tyron's eyes narrowed. What kind of movement? The officer hesitated. "Unknown, but it's everywhere." The voice from the transmission spoke again. "You believed we were weak. You believed we had no way to fight back. That was your second mistake." A low, metallic groan echoed through space as Earth's ancient defense systems, long hidden and forgotten, came to life. Satellites that had been floating dead in orbit suddenly activated, their dark surfaces glowing with power. Deep below the Earth's crust, giant doors began to slide open, revealing rows of long-buried war machines, their engines roaring as they prepared for battle. Siron felt a rare chill run down his spine. "They couldn't have survived this long," he muttered. "We wiped them out." The figure on the screen seemed to hear him. Slowly, it smiled. "You never fought all of us." The transmission cut off. For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then, alarms blared. Siron turned sharply as his officers scrambled in panic. "Warlord," one of them gasped. "The planet. It's..." A massive energy surge erupted from Earth's surface. It spread out like a tidal wave, crashing into the alien fleet, shutting down shields, cutting off communications, Warships flickered, their systems failing one by one. Tyron barely had time to react before the lights on his own flagship went dark. The hum of engines died. The great warship, once unstoppable, was now drifting helplessly in space. And below, the planet glowed with new energy. Earth had been waiting. And now, it was fighting back. Xiron stood frozen on the bridge, his golden eyes locked onto the planet below. The transmission had ended, but its words still echoed in his mind. The humans were supposed to be dead. The war was supposed to be over. Then why was Earth coming back to life? The hum of the failing systems surrounded him. Lights flickered. The great warship, once the pride of the Dominion fleet, was now drifting, its engines lifeless. The energy surge from the planet had crippled not just his ship but the entire armada. Warlord Xiron clenched his fists. This wasn't possible. Status report, he barked. His second-in-command, General Krax, scrambled to respond, his clawed fingers flying across the control panel. We've lost primary propulsion, shield generators, and long-range communications, Warlord, Krax said, his voice tense. Other ships are reporting the same. The entire fleet is blind and vulnerable. Xiron finished, his expression darkening. Krax gave a slow nod. Yes, Warlord. This was no accident. This was a trap. Xiron's mind raced. The humans could not have survived their own destruction. He had seen their cities burn, their forces shatter, their people fall. And yet, Earth had spoken. It had warned them. The ground tremors, the activation of forgotten machines. This was no random resistance. Xiron turned toward his officers, his voice sharp. How long until we regain control? One of the engineers, a pale-skinned insectoid, twitched nervously. Unknown, Warlord. Whatever that pulse was, it has rewritten our systems. Our weapons are locked, our drives are frozen. And Xiron narrowed his eyes. And what? The insectoid hesitated, then pointed at the main screen. Sir, our own satellites are now scanning us. The words sent a cold wave through the bridge. The alien fleet had deployed dozens of surveillance drones around Earth to track human survivors. Now those very drones had turned against them. Krax hissed in frustration. They have taken control of our own technology. Xiron's jaw tightened. No, this was something else. The humans were gone, but their world was still alive. A final defense mechanism. An automated retaliation system, or something worse. We are not waiting for answers, Xiron said. Deploy landing teams. I want boots on the ground immediately. Krax hesitated. Is that wise, Warlord? We have lost control of our fleet. We are at a disadvantage. Xiron's gaze burned into him. And if we wait, we die. The only way to win this battle is to take the planet. Krax lowered his head. As you command. Minutes later, the hangar bays opened. Dropships launched from the disabled warships, descending toward Earth's surface. Hundreds of Dominion soldiers prepared to establish control. Xiron watched from the bridge, knowing that whatever was waiting for them below was not human, but it was still dangerous. The landing teams entered Earth's atmosphere. The dropships pushed through thick, unnatural clouds that crackled with static. Something felt off. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the planet was aware of their presence. As the first ship broke through the mist, the landscape below became clear. The cities were not destroyed. Krax, watching from the bridge, let out a low hiss. Impossible. Xiron leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The last time they had seen Earth, it had been a burning wasteland. Now, towering skyscrapers stood untouched. Streets were clean. Power lines hummed. But something was deeply wrong. There were no people. Not a single human moved through the streets. Cars sat in perfect rows, untouched by war. Screens on buildings still glowed with advertisements from a civilization that no longer existed. It was as if the humans had simply vanished. The lead dropship touched down in the middle of a massive human city. The moment the landing ramp lowered, the silence became deafening. No wind, no animals, no life. The commander of the ground forces, a battle-hardened warrior named Vekran, stepped out cautiously, his pulse rifle ready. "Spread out," he ordered his troops. "Find the source of that transmission." The soldiers moved through the empty streets, their weapons raised. Every step echoed. The city felt too perfect, like it had been frozen in time. Vekran motioned toward a nearby skyscraper. "Check inside." 2 soldiers moved forward. The moment they placed their hands on the glass doors, a deep mechanical voice boomed from the buildings themselves. "You do not belong here." The soldiers froze. The city came alive. Streetlights turned red. Power grids surged. Digital billboards flickered, each one now displaying the same chilling message. "UAV is your FAT." A sudden shockwave rippled through the streets. The ground cracked. Metal shutters slammed shut over every building entrance, trapping the soldiers outside. The Dominion forces scrambled, confusion turning to panic. "Back to the ship," Vekran roared. The troops turned, but something was waiting for them. Figures emerged from the shadows. They looked human. Same height, same shape, but their eyes glowed in eerie white. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized. One soldier raised his rifle. "Identify yourselves." The figures did not answer. Instead, they took a single step forward. Vekran's instincts screamed at him. Fire. Gunfire erupted. The energy bolts hit their targets, but did nothing. The figures did not fall. They did not even flinch. Then they moved. Faster than anything Vekran had ever seen, the figures rushed forward. The first soldier barely had time to scream before a metallic hand pierced through his chest. They were not human. They were something else. On the flagship, Chiron and Krax watched in horror as the team's vitals flatlined one by one. The last transmission from the ground team was a single, chilling message. They were waiting for us. Then the feed cut off. Chiron took a slow breath. The humans were gone, but their world was still fighting. Chiron stared at the flickering screen, his claws gripping the edge of the control panel. The last message from the ground team had cut off abruptly. No gunfire, no screams, just silence. The fleet's long-range scanners showed no signs of life on the surface. No movement, no heat signatures. The soldiers had vanished. "This is a nightmare," General Krax muttered under his breath, his scaled hands twitching. "We underestimated them, Warlord. This planet is not dead. It is a trap." Chiron didn't respond. He knew it already. The signs were there from the moment Earth's final transmission had begun. They had walked into something ancient, something waiting. But now was not the time for hesitation. "Prepare another landing team," Chiron ordered. "Double the forces." Krax turned to him, eyes wide. "Warlord, the first team never reported back. We don't even know what happened to them." Chiron's golden eyes burned. "Then we find out." Minutes later, a second wave of dropships descended. This time, the landing teams were heavily armed, equipped with pulse cannons, energy shields, and armored war drones. They would not be taken by surprise. The ships touched down in the exact same location as the first team. The city looked just as before, silent, untouched, perfect. Vekran's second-in-command, a battle-tested soldier named Ralvik, stepped onto the pavement, scanning the area. The first team's ship was still there, its doors open. Inside, their equipment remained, but the soldiers were gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. Ralvik tightened his grip on his weapon. "I don't like this." "Spread out," came the order. "Find them." The soldiers moved in pairs, advancing cautiously. The air was thick, heavy, almost unnatural. It felt as if something was watching them. One of the soldiers moved toward a nearby street corner. His visor scanned the area, detecting no life. He was about to turn away when a human figure stepped into view. The soldier froze. "Identify yourself." The figure did not move. It stood at the edge of the street, motionless. Its face was shadowed, only its glowing white eyes visible. Ralvik approached carefully. "We won't ask again. Identify." The figure tilted its head, its movements too smooth, too mechanical. Then, without warning, it rushed forward. Faster than any living thing should be able to move, the figure crossed the distance in an instant. The soldier barely had time to react before a cold, metal hand gripped his throat. He tried to fire, but the weapon was ripped from his hands. Then, more figures stepped out of the shadows. 1, 2, 5, 10. They were everywhere. The soldiers opened fire, energy bolts ripping through the air, but it didn't matter. The figures did not stop. They moved like machines, dodging, twisting, closing the gap too fast for the Dominion troops to handle. Screams filled the communication feed. Soldiers were torn apart, their weapons useless. Ralvik fell back, trying to retreat to the ship. "Fall back. Get to the ship. You have sealed your fate." A sudden shockwave rippled through the streets. The ground cracked. Metal shutters slammed shut over every building entrance, trapping the soldiers outside. The Dominion forces scrambled, confusion turning to panic. "Back to the ship," Vecron roared. The troops turned, but something was waiting for them. Figures emerged from the shadows. They looked human. Same height, same shape, but their eyes glowed an eerie white. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized. One soldier raised his rifle. "Identify yourselves." The figures did not answer. Instead, they took a single step forward. Vecron's instincts screamed at him. Fire. Gunfire erupted. The energy bolts hit their targets, but did nothing. The figures did not fall. They did not even flinch. Then they moved. Faster than anything Vecron had ever seen, the figures rushed forward. The first soldier barely had time to scream before a metallic hand pierced through his chest. They were not human. They were something else. On the flagship, Xiron and Krax watched in horror as the team's vitals flatlined one by one. The last transmission from the ground team was a single chilling message. They were waiting for us. Then the feed cut off. Xiron took a slow breath. The humans were gone. But their world was still fighting. Xiron stared at the flickering screen, his claws gripping the edge of the control panel. The last message from the ground team had cut off abruptly. No gunfire, no screams, just silence. The fleet's long-range scanners showed no signs of life on the surface. No movement, no heat signatures. The soldiers had vanished. "This is a nightmare," General Krax muttered under his breath, his scaled hands twitching. "We underestimated them. Warlord, this planet is not dead. It is a trap." Xiron didn't respond. He knew it already. The signs were there from the moment Earth's final transmission had begun. They had walked into something ancient, something waiting. But now was not the time for hesitation. "Prepare another landing team," Xiron ordered. "Double the forces." Krax turned to him, eyes wide. "Warlord, the first team never reported back. We don't even know what happened to them." Xiron's golden eyes burned. "Then we find out." Minutes later, a second wave of dropships descended. This time, the landing teams were heavily armed, equipped with pulse cannons, energy shields, and armored war drones. They would not be taken by surprise. The ships touched down in the exact same location as the first team. The city looked just as before, silent, untouched, perfect. Vecron's second-in-command, a battle-tested soldier named Ralvik, stepped onto the pavement, scanning the area. The first team's ship was still there, its doors open. Inside, their equipment remained, but the soldiers were gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. Ralvik tightened his grip on his weapon. "I come like this." "Spread out," came the order. "Find them." The soldiers moved in pairs, advancing cautiously. The air was thick, heavy, almost unnatural. It felt as if something was watching them. One of the soldiers moved toward a nearby street corner. His visor scanned the area, detecting no life. He was about to turn away when a human figure stepped into view. The soldier froze. "Identify yourself." The figure did not move. It stood at the edge of the street, motionless. Its face was shadowed, only its glowing white eyes visible. Ralvik approached carefully. "We won't ask again. Identify." The figure tilted its head, its movements too smooth, too mechanical. Then, without warning, it rushed forward. Faster than any living thing should be able to move, the figure crossed the distance in an instant. The soldier barely had time to react before a cold, metal hand gripped his throat. He tried to fire, but the weapon was ripped from his hands. Then more figures stepped out of the shadows. 1, 2, 5, 10. They were everywhere. The soldiers opened fire, energy bolts ripping through the air, but it didn't matter. The figures did not stop. They'd moved like machines, dodging, twisting, closing the gap too fast for the Dominion troops to handle. Screams filled the communication feed. Soldiers were torn apart, their weapons useless. Ralvik fell back, trying to retreat to the ship. Fall back, get to the ship. But the figures were faster. One of them lunged, grabbing a soldier and lifting him off the ground. With inhuman strength, it slammed him against the pavement. Bones cracked. The soldier stopped moving. Ralvik barely made it to the dropship. The doors began to close, but the last thing he saw before they sealed shut was the city changing. The streets shifted, like a machine reconfiguring itself. Buildings moved, rearranging, trapping soldiers inside. The city was not a city at all. It was a weapon. As the dropship launched back toward orbit, the pilot's hands were shaking. Ralvik collapsed into a seat, his breathing heavy. "Get us out of here. Now." The pilot pushed the engines to full power. The ship rose, breaking through the atmosphere. Ralvik tried to steady his hands, his mind still racing. Then the cockpit alarm screamed. "Something's wrong," the pilot shouted. "The autopilot. It's been hijacked." Ralvik's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, hijacked?" The pilot pointed at the screen. The navigation controls were locked. The ship was no longer under their control. Ralvik turned to the window and froze. Above them, the Dominion fleet was no longer in control of itself. The warships, once powerful and indomitable, were shifting position on their own. Their weapons, once aimed at the planet, were now turning toward each other. The fleet had been hacked. Ralvik's mouth went dry. "Warlord Siren, do you copy?" The fleet. A new voice cut through the transmission. It was not Dominion. It was not human. "You have overstayed your welcome." The fleet's defenses activated against itself. Chiron watched in horror as his own warships opened fire. Chiron watched in silent horror as his fleet turned against itself. Great warships, once the pride of the Dominion, now fired upon their own. Plasma beams cut through the void, slicing into hulls that were never meant to take friendly fire. Explosions bloomed in space, silent but deadly, as vessels were ripped apart by their own weapons. Communications erupted into chaos. "Warlord, our cannons are firing without command. We've lost control of the engines. Our shields are down. We are sitting targets." Siron clenched his fists, his golden eyes locked onto the devastation outside. This was not a battle. It was an execution. Krax's claws scraped against the metal console as he fought to override the system. "Warlord, someone, has infiltrated our mainframe. Shut it down." Siron barked. "I'm trying." Krax growled. "It's rewriting our code faster than I can counteract it." Siron turned toward the main screen, his expression dark. The source of the attack was clear. Earth. The planet below remained eerily silent, its surface as still as a predator lying in wait. No fleets had risen to meet them. No armies had emerged from the shadows. The planet itself was the enemy. A cold realization gripped Chiron. This was not a last act of human defiance. This was something else. Something far worse. The voice returned, cutting through their failing systems. Deep, metallic, and filled with an intelligence not human, but not entirely machine. You were warned. A surge of energy pulsed from the planet. The ships closest to the blast shattered instantly, their hulls collapsing like brittle shells. Others were dragged downward, their systems crushed under an unseen force. Chiron braced himself as the flagship's alarms screamed. The gravity field around Earth had changed. It was no longer pulling with the force of a natural planet. It was pulling with intent. "We're being dragged in," an officer shouted. Krax's eyes darted over the failing displays. "Engines offline. We can't escape." Chiron's mind raced. Every second wasted brought them closer to their deaths. He slammed a fist against the console. "Find me a solution." Krax hesitated. There was one option, a dangerous one. "Warlord," he said slowly, "we still have the planetary disruptor." Chiron's eyes flickered with realization. The planetary disruptor, the Dominion's deadliest weapon. A device capable of tearing a world's surface apart. It had never been used before. No world had ever required it. Until now. Chiron made his decision in an instant. Activate it. Krax swallowed. "That might kill us along with the planet." Chiron turned to him, his voice cold. "If we do nothing, we die anyway." Krax nodded grimly. Activating disruptor. The ship's last remaining energy was redirected. A massive weapon, buried deep within the flagship, began to glow with an unnatural light. On the surface below, the land itself seemed to react. Buildings shifted. Streets reformed. The entire planet moved as if aware of the incoming attack. The disruptor charge. Energy built to a breaking point. The moment had come. Chiron's hand hovered over the activation console. Fire. A blinding beam erupted from the ship, cutting through space like a spear of judgment. It struck Earth dead center. For a moment, silence. Then the planet screamed. Not an explosion. Not a reaction of nature. A scream. The sound shook their bones, even across the void of space. It was alive. A shockwave rippled outward, smashing into the fleet like a tidal wave. Chiron's vision blurred as the ship's systems short-circuited. The crew collapsed, clutching their heads, their minds filled with something alien, ancient, and furious. And then, everything stopped. The alarms went silent. The shaking ceased. The ships, once out of control, went dark. Outside, Earth remained, untouched. The disruptor, the Dominion's ultimate weapon, had done nothing. Krax's voice was barely a whisper. "It's still here, the planet. It didn't even flinch." Chiron had no words. And then the voice returned. Cold. Final. "Now it is our turn." A new energy pulse surged from the planet. This one was different. It was not disabling their systems. It was taking them. One by one, the ships began disappearing. Not destroyed. Vanishing. Chiron's heart pounded. Get us out of here. But the flagship was next. The darkness swallowed them whole. Chiron awoke to silence. Not the silence of space, filled with the distant hum of energy cores and life support systems. This was absolute. No alarms, no crew shouting orders, only a void deeper than anything he had ever known. He forced his eyes open. Darkness. For a terrifying moment, he thought he had gone blind. But then, a whisper. Not words, something else. A sensation, brushing against his mind, like unseen hands pressing into his thoughts. Chiron struggled to move, his limbs sluggish, his body unresponsive. He was still on the flagship, or what remained of it. The command deck was intact, but the control panels were dead. The massive windows that once overlooked the fleet showed nothing. Not space, not stars, just an endless black void. Then, movement. Sciron turned his head sharply. Krax was there, suspended in the air like a puppet with cut strings, his limbs floating unnaturally. Around them, the rest of the crew hung in place, unconscious. A deep vibration rumbled through the ship, not from the engines. They were offline. This was external. Something was here. Sciron clenched his teeth, forcing his body to respond. He reached for his sidearm, but his fingers barely twitched. The air itself was heavy, pressing down on him. A sudden light flashed in the void outside. No, it wasn't a light. It was an eye. Massive, inhuman, stretching across the abyss. It was not a simple organ of sight. It was something more. It was awareness itself, looking through him, seeing not just his body but his mind, his past, his thoughts. And then, you are beginning to understand. The voice was inside his head, woven into his thoughts. It wasn't speaking in a language. It was imposing meaning directly onto his mind. Sciron fought to stay calm. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The eye blinked, a slow, deliberate motion that sent waves through the void. "We are what you feared, what you ignored, what you destroyed, and what remains." Sciron's mind reeled. "You're human." The voice did not laugh, but it felt like it did. "There is no word for what we have become. Humanity is a fragment of what we were. We are more than that now." Sciron gritted his teeth. "If you are more, why do you still hold on to vengeance?" The void rippled. The weight pressing on him increased. Vengeance. The word echoed, distorted, as if it was foreign to them. "No, this is not vengeance. This is correction." Sciron's mind raced. The Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds, broken empires, crushed civilizations, but nothing like this had ever happened before. "What do you want?" he demanded. The eye stared. The ship shuddered as an unseen force wrapped around it, pulling it deeper into the void, to fix what was broken. And then the void changed. The blackness peeled away, like a curtain being lifted, revealing something impossible. A planet, but not Earth. Something else. It looked like Earth, but wrong. The landmasses were shifting, reforming like a living thing. The oceans pulsed, glowing with a strange energy. Cities floated, suspended in the sky, constantly moving, rearranging. And then the voices began. Not from the ship, from the planet below. A sea of whispers, speaking 1,000 languages, overlapping, merging. They were not words. They were memories. Sciron's mind ached from the weight of them. The Dominion had destroyed Earth, but in its place, something else had risen. Something alive. Something waiting. Sciron turned to Krax, who was beginning to stir. The second-in-command's eyes fluttered open, and in an instant pure terror filled them. "Warlord!" Krax gasped. We should not be here." Sciron couldn't argue, but it was too late. The ship was descending, not under its own power. The planet was pulling them in, and for the first time in his life, Sciron, the conqueror of 100 worlds, felt something foreign in his heart. Fear. The ship descended, pulled downward by an unseen force. It was not gravity, not a tractor beam. This was something else, something that had will. Sciron gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move. Whatever was pressing down on them, it was easing, only slightly, enough for him to push himself to his feet, his legs unsteady. Krax stumbled beside him, his eyes wide as he stared out of the shattered viewport. The planet below was shifting, the landmasses moving as if alive. The oceans glowed with an eerie light, pulsing like veins in a living body. "This isn't a world," Krax whispered, his voice almost lost to the unnatural silence. "This is a being." Sciron didn't reply. He didn't have to. He knew it was true. Their ship and the remnants of the fleet were being pulled toward the surface. One by one, the massive Dominion warships vanished into the mist covering the upper atmosphere. There was no resistance, no way to escape. The fleet that had come to dominate Earth was now being consumed by it. The ship shuddered violently as it broke through the thick clouds, and below, the landscape came into full view. It was impossible. Cities floated, rearranging themselves in real time. Great structures built and unbuilt in the blink of an eye, shifting like the bones of a massive creature. Roads moved, twisting like serpents, forming new pathways and then erasing them. The land itself was not stable. It was changing, evolving, watching. Xiron's claws tightened into fists. Prepare for impact. But there was no impact. Instead, as the ship reached the surface, it slowed. Not because of the thrusters. They were still dead. The ship hovered, suspended above the land by an unseen force. Then, the hull split open. Not from an explosion. The ship was being unraveled. Panels peeled away like they were nothing but fabric. Metal uncoiled, stretching into the air, bending into impossible shapes before simply melting into nothing. Xiron roared in defiance, but his voice was swallowed by the storm of change around him. The crew screamed as the ship was unmade. Xiron fell, his body weightless for a moment before he landed on the surface. The ground beneath him was soft, too soft, like flesh covered in stone. He forced himself up, scanning the surroundings. Cracks landed beside him, coughing, eyes wild with fear. Around them, other soldiers, those who survived, were struggling to their feet. But the moment they tried to move, they stopped. Not by choice. Their bodies would not obey. Xiron felt it too. His muscles refused to respond, as if some unseen force was holding him in place. And then, a figure emerged from the mist. It was human-shaped, but it was not human. Its body was fluid, shifting, its face a constant blur of past and present, male and female, young and old. Every second, it changed, as if it were every human that had ever lived, all at once. The air around it hummed with an energy that made Xiron's skull ache. You still do not understand. The voice wasn't coming from the figure's mouth. It was inside them, filling their thoughts, rewriting their fears. Xiron snarled. What are you? The figure tilted its head, a motion almost curious. The question is not what we are. The question is what you have become. Krax groaned, his body shaking as he fought to move. You're a mutation, a perversion of what once was. The figure's ever-changing face froze for a moment. Its shifting features settled into something almost human, a face Xiron recognized. One he had seen in the final transmission from Earth, the last human who had spoken before the planet fell. We were given no choice. The world rumbled beneath them, and then they saw them. Not one, not two, thousands. Figures emerged from the fog, stepping forward in silent unison. They were all different, yet the same, shifting, evolving, growing with each step, living echoes of humanity, infused with something far greater than before. You thought you had erased us, the voice said, now coming from every direction. But we endured. We evolved. And now we will do what you failed to do. Xiron forced his body to move, to fight the paralysis gripping him. And what is that? He snarled. The ground split open beneath them, revealing the depthless abyss, a void that pulsed with the light of stars, of galaxies, of things older than the Dominion itself. The figure smiled, the first truly human expression it had made. We will become something greater. The air shifted, reality bent, and in that moment, Xiron understood. Earth had not just survived. It had transcended. And now, it was about to rewrite the universe. Xiron's mind screamed against the impossible. The ground beneath him pulsed, not like rock or soil, but like a living thing. A world that had breath, thought, purpose. The figures surrounding him were no longer just shifting phantoms of humanity. They were something beyond mortal understanding. The Dominion had conquered thousands of civilizations, broken countless species, erased entire cultures from history. But this was different. They hadn't just failed to destroy Earth. They had created something unstoppable. Krax staggered beside him, his claws trembling. The hardened warrior, a veteran of countless wars, had never known fear. But now, he was shaking like a cornered animal. "Warlord," he whispered, barely able to breathe. What do we do?" Xiron didn't have an answer. The sky cracked open, revealing something beyond the stars. Not space, not the black void of the universe. Something older, something waiting. And then, the figure stepped forward. It no longer shifted, no longer changed. It had decided. It had chosen a form. A face staring at Tyron, with something far worse than anger. Understanding. "You believe yourselves to be gods," the voice echoed, not in sound, but in the very fabric of reality itself. "But you are children, playing with weapons you do not comprehend." Xiron gritted his teeth. "Then kill us and be done with it." The figure smiled. A slow, knowing, terrifying smile. "We do not seek revenge," it said. "That is a mortal concept, one you will never understand." The ground rippled, and suddenly, Tyron felt something changing inside him. His mind, his body, his very existence. Krax let out a strangled gasp. What are you doing to us?" The figure tilted its head. "You do not deserve death." The sky shifted, the clouds burning with an unnatural glow. "You do not deserve mercy." Xiron's breath hitched as his vision blurred. "You deserve to evolve." A shockwave rippled through the air, not with force, but with concept. Something unraveled inside him. Something rewrote. His claws trembled, then changed. His armor melted into his skin. His body twisted, not with pain, but with something else. Something stranger. He felt his own DNA shifting, his bones reshaping, his mind opening. He was not being destroyed. He was being remade. And it wasn't just him. Krax screamed, his body twisting as his species was rewritten. The Dominion warriors dropped to their knees, writhing, their flesh reshaping into something unrecognizable. They were not Dominion anymore. They were becoming something new, something the universe had never seen before. Xiron tried to resist, tried to hold on to who he was, what he was. But it was impossible. The figure leaned closer, its human-like form fading into the mist. "This is not destruction," it whispered, its voice an entire civilization speaking as one. "This is rebirth." Xiron's vision went white. A single final thought echoed in his mind before everything ceased to exist. The Dominion had come to destroy Earth, but Earth had rewritten the Dominion. Forever.